take a few minutes and visit our website at the battleofgettysburgpodcast.com to shop, buy some new merch, check in on our upcoming events, and of course, buy Civil War books from one of your favorite podcasters.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. I'm your co-host, Jim Hessler, and once again, I am joined by my co-host, Jody Wilson. Jody, how are you?
Hi, everybody. We're doing great.
Okay, so on this episode, we're going to be joined by fellow licensed battlefield guide and historian Paul Bailey to discuss George Meade's councils, plural, councils of war during the Gettysburg campaign. But before we do that, let's take a few minutes to kind of unpack the state of the show. You know, I hate doing this stuff. You know, I've resisted doing this for a while. You and I, we just do this we do this, the podcast as a hobby. We are both professional public historians in our own sphere. And in between all of our other activities, we try to find time to podcast. So we kind of do this as a hobby. I kind of laugh when I see fellow content providers kind of do these serious and misty-eyed, folks, we got to get on and do a state of the show. It's just not us. Am I right?
You're right. We keep everything light and fun and enjoying history, you
That's
know?
right. And we keep our emotions bottled up. We don't have these outbursts. So anyways, so we've been putting off kind of talking about this for a while, but no matter how many times we tell people what the state of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast is, they keep asking us, what's the status of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast? And specifically, people seem to kind of keep saying, hey, I haven't seen anything from you on Spotify in a year. What's going on? So we should probably talk about this. Am I right?
That's right. I mean, we're still producing content. We're still out there on the battlefield. We're still talking about different topics. We just haven't been able to upload um, any of our episodes in a podcast manner.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So let me kind of
We've
tell
been put,
people,
yeah.
let me tell people what I think the update is.
Okay.
So, Eric and I started the Battle of Gettysburg podcast together, I don't know, now about 6 years or so ago. Eric has decided he doesn't want to do this anymore. That's it, folks. Plain simple. Doesn't want to do it anymore. There's no drama. We're still buddies. There's no health issues involved. But Eric has simply said, look, he doesn't want to do it anymore. And folks, while we're disappointed in that, we're not out here saving lives. It's just podcasting. Life will go on. We're all still friends, still buds, and that sort of thing. Jody is super fan Sarah likes to say, and I'm giving Sarah a shout out. It's not that deep, Chief. It's not that deep. But if that situation changes at some point, then great. Of course, we'll be back here with a different announcement. But that's why, right now it's just Jody and I and assorted guests. We've had a lot of friends in the Gettysburg community come on, help us out, participate, and that's great. And that's going to continue too. So the second part, kind of as Jody, as you were talking about with the audio podcasts, Eric needs to transition some things to us, including our Spotify account access. When he does that, we will go back to recording on Spotify and putting audio episodes out there. Again, it's really as simple as that, and that's the situation here. I do want to point out, though, that, not that anybody's counting, but this is going to be video number 65 on our Battle of Gettysburg podcast YouTube channel. Jody, I'll repeat the number 65.
Wow.
We did
That's a
50.
lot.
Well, we did 51. We did 51 audio podcasts on Spotify, and we've done 65 on YouTube.
Mhm.
So when people, kind of treat our YouTube channel like the back door, we actually have more on YouTube than
Yeah.
we ever did on Spotify. And this is really where most of our content is. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
something else, Jody. Did you realize you and we did 15 of those videos in the past year?
Whew. Look at us go.
I'm kind of waiting for the dramatic pause there. So, hello, we've done 15. We've done 15 in the past year, which
Maybe that's the problem. They don't want to see us on YouTube. They just want to hear
no.
us.
Jody,
I don't know about that.
the show, come
Yeah.
on. We know people want to see you. We know that. Um, back to my point. Back to my point, and now I've kind of forgotten what the point was.
We're
15,
doing a lot. We're doing a lot.
we've done 15 of these in the past year, which quite frankly would have equated to like 4 years on the Spotify platform.
Hmm.
Just saying, it's the reality of it. So, we're here to stay. Battle of Gettysburg podcast on YouTube. You all can help us out. By stop asking, because here's the state of the show. So stop asking. And B, you can help us out by liking, subscribing, and watching on YouTube. All right. The good news is, I think, because you know me, I'm always a glass half full kind of guy, right? Right.
Sure. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So the good news is, Jody, clearly the number of people who ask us on social media, who stop me on tours to ask, who
Hmm.
stop us at book signings and all that stuff, clearly the number of people who have asked about that demonstrates how popular what we're doing is. But we do need to kind of boost up some of those YouTube numbers and get some of the
Right.
Spotify people over here to YouTube. Hopefully now
And,
we'll do that, that we've addressed this
and
in an
people are always like,
manner.
yeah, but I like to listen to you in the car. Well, you can listen to YouTube. You don't have to watch
I
it.
know, right?
I
Right?
don't.
Right? Right? You can listen to YouTube while the two we seem to hear are in my car and while I'm cutting my grass. Folks, you can listen to YouTube while you're cutting your
Yeah.
grass. In fact, we would not want you to watch YouTube in your car or cutting your grass because it
Oh
could be a
no. No.
safety issue. But I think so. I think that's it. I think to repeat, we are staying on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast on YouTube. As soon as we get our Spotify access handed over to us, Jody and I will continue to put audio stuff out there as well. And then you can listen while you're in your car and cutting your grass and all that
Yeah.
other all that other stuff. So that's what I had for the state of the podcast. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I mean, we have some great things coming up in 2026. We'll be making some announcements, so make sure you follow us on social media.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right,
Yeah.
particularly on Facebook. We kind of need the
Oh yeah.
Instagram access handed over too.
Yeah.
So we're big on Facebook, Battle of Gettysburg
Yeah,
podcast on Facebook. And you point out too, great things in 2026. We also did like half a dozen events in the
we
past year
did.
and a half. So we're still doing events too. So when people say we haven't done anything for a year, I don't understand.
I don't either. It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. Because you know
Okay.
what? You and we don't do this for money. We just do
No.
this to do
We
great
love history.
Gettysburg history and some other stuff. But yeah, we
Yeah.
just do it because we love history.
Yes.
All right. So with that, how about we will close out our State of the Union address here and we'll just bring on Paul Bailey and we'll get started on the thing that we're really here for and the thing that people are here to hear us do, right?
That's right. We're going to welcome Paul Bailey.
Okay, Jody, and we're back with Paul Bailey.
Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Hey, Jody and Jim, how are you?
Good, Paul. Good, Paul. So let me read your bio. So, in this new era that we just kind of talked about on our State of the podcast, I don't really want to use the term guest. So let's just say tonight you're our guest co-host. How about that? But again, you're a longtime friend, a colleague of both of ours. Paul Bailey retired from the United States Army in 2009 after 24 years of active service, rising from the rank of private to lieutenant colonel. An Iraqi war veteran, Paul still supports the military as a strategic planner in a directorate under the Office of the Secretary of War. Paul became a licensed battlefield guide in 2010, and one of his passions is passing on the leadership lessons to cadets from the Army Heritage and Education Center's ROTC Staff Ride program. And that kind of leads into a little bit of what we're going to talk about tonight in a way. Jody, you worked with Paul too when you were over at the
We did.
foundation, right? On the
We
leadership
did.
stuff. Mhm.
Yeah, the podcast days. Woo.
And you should still be at the foundation, Jody, by the way. But anyways,
Pre-podcast days, yeah.
now I do want to add this is Paul's second appearance on the
Ah,
Battle of Gettysburg podcast. As you appeared, I'm sure you remember, in our early fantasy draft
fantasy league, yeah.
episode. I forget where you placed. I know you didn't win because I know Eisenberg won, but
Middle of the pack, I'm sure.
I thought maybe that would have been in your bio too, but it wasn't. So.
If I won, I would raise him.
All right, Paul just recently moved to Gettysburg with his girlfriend Gina, who is a retired teacher and children's book author. Actually, the idea for tonight's episode kind of sprang together at Paul and Gina's dinner table, where we spend many
Yeah.
pleasant evenings debating life in Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, and things of that nature. And last but not least, over the winter, Paul hopes to begin working on a book, his long-awaited book about
I
Major
feel like we need a
General
drum roll.
John Newton. John Newton. I have Sickles, I have Custer, Paul has John Newton. And we've been talking for a long time about whether he was going to get started on that book. So we're eagerly hoping that'll happen this winter.
I keep getting sidetracked listening to somebody's podcast instead of right.
Clearly on YouTube, right?
That's right. So my
Yes, both. Well, Jim, like you said, I'm not only a fellow guide, and I'm very happy to have Jody and Jim as friends, but I also, in the finest tradition of the wrestling tradition,
Uh,
fan of the podcast. In fact, this summer, I was very happy to take a gentleman and his daughter out on a tour, and we got out to the peach orchard, and they're like, "This is just like I heard on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast." And so I need to pass along a hello from your super fan in Singapore.
Singapore. Well,
Singapore. Yeah,
hopefully
wow.
the YouTube tentacles are reaching to Singapore and they're watching tonight. So
yeah,
hopefully.
him and his daughter knew a lot about the battle from listening to the podcast. So I'm
Good, good. That's
very
what we're
honored.
trying to do. Educate, win over hearts and minds. Am I right? Hearts and
That's
minds.
right.
Pocketbooks and wallets.
All right. So how about we get to the topic at hand? As it relates to military leadership, George Meade's July 2nd evening Council of War gets all the press, but it was really one of several that he called during the Gettysburg campaign. And so we thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about at least four of those councils of war and what it tells us a little bit about Meade's leadership and things of that nature. And that's what Paul's going to do with us tonight. How about Paul? Maybe let's start out with your military background, your Army background. For the layman in the audience, do you want to maybe start by defining what exactly is a council of war? And for the layman, does that differ from a traditional meeting?
Well, I would tell everybody that a council of war is just that. It's a meeting. As you said, Meade has a number of council of wars during the Gettysburg campaign, and during my military career, I was in a number of different meetings, and meetings really have two purposes. You want to try to gather or give information to the people who are attending the meeting. And if you're the boss and you've made a decision, you want to get that decision out to everybody so that way they know exactly what your decision is and what your intent is should something not go exactly according to plan. And if you're not the boss, then you want to ask the boss for, hey, I got an issue, only the boss can solve by making a decision. So meetings are all about two things, information and decision making. In my last duty assignment, I was at a four-star joint command, meaning Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, and we were all working together. And one of our main missions was to train the two, three, and four-star headquarters that were getting ready to deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan, or getting ready to deploy if there was a crisis. And I had the pleasure of working with a number of retired two, three, and four-star generals. And they listed out all the different meetings that they attended throughout their career. And they actually binned them in different categories. And they came up with an acronym because that's what we do in the military.
Right.
And the acronym was B2C2WG, meaning Board, Bureau, Center, Cell, and Working Group. Now, me, because I was a staff officer, it was the working group. I was a logistics subject matter expert, and we worked on some of the logistics issues that we were dealing with. Or I was part of a planning group, and we were trying to figure out what to do tomorrow, the next day, the next week. What if we attack here? What if they attack us? And so that kind of working group or planning group is where we kind of jokingly call that's where the sausage making happens.
Mm.
Nobody in that working group is a decision maker. Now let's move on to the center or the cell. And most people are familiar with an operations center or an emergency operations center for first responders out there. It is the place where information comes in because that's what's happening on the battlefield during the crisis. And there's typically one maybe colonel or one or two-star general in the ops center who has the authority to make a critical decision right then and there because they're familiar with the plan and they also know the commander's intent, what they're trying to accomplish. Now let's move on to the boards and bureaus. You were in business, you know that there is a chairman of the board of directors. That is where the commanding general is. It's where the highest ranking subject matter experts are, and they are providing that information to the decision maker so the decision maker can make a well-informed decision. And so, why am I talking about today's military? We should be talking about Meade, right? Well, I look at today's military, we learn the lessons from the past. Now, who are those primary staff people that created the meetings that I attended? Well, there's six key staff members. The Adjutant General, which Meade has, the military or the Bureau of Military Intelligence, which is the two in modern military, which Meade has. There is the logistics expert, the four, which Meade has with Rufus Ingalls and the chief of ordnance and Letterman and his medical staff. And then there's the signal corps, which in today's military would be the G6 or the J6. The two other members that I didn't mention are the J3 or G3, who is current operations. That is that person who has to deal with the critical moment happening right now. Well, who's doing that for Meade? It's Meade and his corps commanders like Hancock sending Carroll's brigade over here or, Sedgwick quickly plugging gaps in the line.
Dan Sickles courageously moving forward, for example.
Courageously
Right,
moving
right.
forward, doing his own reconnaissance. There you go. And the last key staff member is the planner, the J5 or the G5. That planner is thinking about if the current operations is the person who is dealing with what is happening right now. The planner is thinking about, well, what if they get around our flank? Or what if we have to retreat? Or what if they retreat? What do we do next? Who's doing that for Meade? Well, there's one person who's supposed to bring all that together, all those key staff components together for the commander, and it's the chief of staff, and it's Daniel Butterfield, somebody we very rarely talk about on your typical 2-hour tour of the battlefield. And so, it's Meade, Butterfield, those key staff members, and the corps commanders that really play a key role in providing that information to Meade during the Council of War, so that way he can make a decision.
Okay. All right. How about in before we go deeper than that, I know you and I had sort of talked offline a little bit too. Any thoughts about how were councils of war viewed at that time by the military? So by the time the Civil War era, what was the tradition and so on?
Well, there's what is there, a famous quote from Halleck that councils on war never fight. In fact, researching tonight just to double check some things, I found the Comte Paris article as
Hmm.
well. And he writes also that there's this age-old saying that councils of war never fight. Well, really? Because George Washington had multiple councils of war. Okay, when they're sitting in Valley Forge freezing, your generals are getting together for dinner. Is that a council of war, or are they just talking? But there is one council of war in June of 1778 where Washington says, "Okay, here's the information I have as where the British forces are, and oh, by the way, I'm getting reports that there are some militia units that are getting in the rear of the British forces. Maybe we should attack." And if we attack, should it be a general engagement or just a partial engagement? Or should we stay here and wait for the British to attack us? So in that Council of War, he asks almost the same three questions that happens on July 2nd. And the response back is, no, let's just do a partial attack. And I'm sure the Revolutionary War historians will go further into detail. I will just say that General Charles Lee, not Robert E. Lee's father, but Charles Lee does a partial attack. And guess what? It turns into a full on general engagement, which is not what they voted on during that Council of War. And so, a Council of War during the Revolutionary War, okay, so there would have been something in American military history. Now, you mentioned that I'm doing research on Newton. Well, one of the first experiences that Newton has during the American Civil War is in July of 1861. He is the chief engineer for General Robert Patterson's army in the Department of the Shenandoah. And right after the Battle of Falling Waters in 1861, uh, the Union forces has just defeated some guy named Colonel Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, except he's
Hmm.
not Stonewall yet. And they Patterson pulls his people together and asks them, "What do you guys think? Should we chase after Jackson, or should we maybe do something else?" And there's a couple of famous people there at that Council of War: John Newton, George, soon to be the Rocket Chickamauga Thomas, and Fitzjohn Porter. And they all recommend that Patterson should actually pull back to Harper's Ferry and maybe try to do a flank attack from there. And that's what
Hmm.
Patterson does, except that he loses track of Jackson, and Jackson boards a train and heads towards Manassas. I bring that up only to show that Patterson is a veteran of the War of 1812. He's a veteran of the War of Mexico with General Winfield Scott. And so from Washington to the 1812 to the Mexican War to the Civil War, it would have been something passed down and probably taught at West Point. You see a senior mentor of yours, a senior at this time, Patterson is well into his 60s. You're seeing senior officers doing councils of war. Later on, when we talk about the July 2nd, Gibbon says he's never been to a council of war, and he never was one again after the evening of July 2nd. But for a number of the corps commanders in the room, it would have been something that they probably had experienced or read about.
So let's move into Meade then. Obviously, look, we all know the story. We all know the cliche. Meade takes command June 28th. He's only in command for a few days. But I've always said, and I firmly believe, one of the things that informs the way Meade manages the Army of the Potomac during these early days is his relationship with Hooker and some of the experiences that Meade had with Hooker during the Chancellorsville campaign. So I'm going to lead off with a quote from Meade, and then I'll turn it over to you for any thoughts. Meade writes in April 63, so it's April, pre-Chancellorsville, quote, that Hooker is remarkably reticent of his information and plans. I really know nothing of what he intends to do, and that the secrecy might result in important plans being frustrated by subordinates from their ignorance of how much depended on their share of work. Now, we know from kind of April to May to early June, the relationship between Meade and Hooker starts to deteriorate for various reasons. But again, we've got a great quote from Meade on the table, how he feels he's kept out of the loop, he's not being fed information, and he's worried how it might impact plans. Any thoughts on that?
Uh, I guess you know, I'm sorry to keep referring back to this guy, Newton. Uh,
Oh, is that who that is?
Is
Oh.
yeah,
that
that's
right
right
there?
All
there.
right, how many viewers knew what John Newton looked like? Sound off in the comments, but okay.
Um, like you said, going back to Chancellorsville, how does Hooker come to power? We have Fredericksburg, as described as the revolt of the generals, where William Franklin, Baldy Smith, Hooker, I'm sorry, Hooker's even talking bad about Burnside, Edwin Sumner, and Newton, and uh, one of his subordinates actually go talk to Lincoln. And
Mhm.
so, maybe Meade's watch some of this going, okay, I've seen what happens when a commander comes in and says, I'm in charge, everybody listen to me, and then they get undermined. So maybe when he comes in, he's like, hey, what do you guys want to do? you
Yeah.
know?
Well, you say that, but there is a quote from him, and I'll find it somewhere buried in my pile of papers, where he basically says that, right? During the
He does.
Joint Committee of the Conduct of the War, he basically says to the effect, "Hey, I was new, and I didn't feel like it would be appropriate to make big decisions without consulting the senior officers."
Yeah, I think it's in his notes of the 12th July, saying that he felt he couldn't go against his senior corps commanders, um, because some of his corps commanders actually outrank him, except
Yeah.
that he has the position of commanding general. Slocum, Sedgwick. So yeah, so yes, he.
I got into a little argument with one of our guests on a previous program because I made that exact same point, and the guest said, "No, no, no, that's not how it works." And I said, "Oh, yes, that is how it works. There were guys in the army who were senior to Meade."
Yes. And again, so even when we talk about today's military, we have four-star generals in charge of different geographic and areas of the world, but there's only one chairman. And so that person is a four-star general as well. He's not a five-star. And so it's first amongst equals, even if somebody technically has a higher date of rank. So the chairman outranks everybody. And so Meade outranks everybody by position, but there still would have been senior corps commanders to him. So, yeah.
Good, good. Thanks for bringing that up. So it helps reaffirm our position here. So that's good. But to that point, he's got guys that are quote unquote senior to him. That's going to make him, I think, more likely to want to get their, I hate to use the word consensus because we're going to come to that a little bit later, but right, he's going to make sure he wants to consult them before doing anything rash and significant.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think there's been like a revolving door too, right?
Mhm.
Like it doesn't, he writes home to his wife, and I feel like he's very honest when he writes to her that, what does he say? He's embarrassed by the fear of being accused of rashness. Like, so he's saying these feelings, and I think they're very honest because how many leaders have we gone through by now for the Army of
And,
the Potomac? There's
and,
also that fear.
Mhm.
yeah. And that's why I bring up the revolt of the generals, is because we can't just parachute Meade in on June 28th. He has lived this
Hmm.
experience for the last 2 years. He
Right.
knows what a very domineering leadership person is. Jody brings up the point that in private letters to his wife, he's saying, I'm a little nervous. Compare that to Ambrose Burnside, who goes, I don't know why they gave me the job. I get no respect. It's like, whoa, whoa.
The
whoa.
Rodney Dangerfield of the
Yeah, you can only
yeah.
say that a couple of times before people start believing it. Okay,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
understand humble, but then there's, oh, wait, maybe this guy shouldn't be in charge.
yeah, yeah. Well, into that before, because I do want to move on to Gettysburg, but I do want to point out too, Chancellorsville, May 4th. Remember, Hooker has what could be deemed as a council of war after the debacle of May 2nd, May 3rd, where he basically calls everybody together. And Hooker has clearly already made up his mind that the army is going to retreat, but they sort of put it to a vote. Do we stay? Do we go? And the generals are divided, and that's going to kind of lead to some additional friction between Meade and Hooker. But I do want to point out, too, that in the aftermath of that, when George Meade is kind of going to the generals and saying, "Tell me how I voted. I want to prove Hooker wrong," sort of thing, and he goes to Dan Sickles, I do want to point out Sickles responds that before answering Meade's question, Sickles kind of lectures his future commanding general that it will not be irrelevant to refer to the regret which I expressed when the consultation began that written inquiries or propositions were not submitted to this council. If my suggestions predicated on this unsatisfactory mode had not been disregarded, the issue of which you now inform me could not have been arisen. So I just want to point out, as we move into the Gettysburg campaign, Dan Sickles, of all people, brings up the procedural issue of, hey, you guys should have written this down, which, may or may not influence how things play out on July 2nd and beyond. And of course, that is today's edition of the Dan Sickles Report.
Well
Paul,
done.
over to you.
Well done. Well done. Uh, uh, you are much more versed in Chancellorsville than I am. Isn't there a point in there where kind of Reynolds wants to go to sleep and goes, "I'll do whatever Meade wants to do." Now that's great, reinforcing a confidence booster for Meade. But at the same time, as you brought up, there's friction now between if Meade actually got into a heated argument with Hooker on my ROTC staff rides. I always bring up the learning point here. Be careful when the captain tells you that your platoon has to go do this crappy mission. Don't go back to your platoon and go, "Oh, the captain's making us do this," because you are now telling all your soldiers that you don't want to do it. And so they will move as slowly as possible. And so I always say, don't talk bad about the boss, because one day you're going to be the boss. And you just authorized talking bad about the boss, and now they're going to talk bad about you. And so maybe Meade is also thinking, yeah, maybe I should have not
Yeah.
done that.
I,
How
I,
can I be a leader?
I think that's a great point, tying back to what you said about the revolt of the generals. That sort of culture seems like it was rampant in the Army of the Potomac among some of these guys.
Yeah. And I think they know the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War is looking over their shoulder.
Yeah, yeah. All right, how about we get to Gettysburg? So we said there's basically four Gettysburg councils of war we want to talk about, some better known than others. So again, Meade is taking command. The army is on the march. July 2nd is really the first time everybody is together on the field. And it's really going to be July 2nd, 3 p.m., when George Meade is going to potentially call what could be his first council of war in command of the Army of the Potomac and with the campaign. Paul, you want to sort of share your thoughts on that event?
Yeah, uh, this is where a lot of people go, "Well, you're a Meade apologist," and I'm like, "Oh no, I'm going to start off by beating up General Meade because if we say that Meade arrived here at midnight, having missed the entire first day, when the sun comes up on July 2nd, what is he doing? He's riding around the battlefield doing a reconnaissance. Um, knock on wood, Lee doesn't attack first thing on the morning of July 2nd because what's the plan? What are we doing besides sitting on high ground, cooking breakfast in column formation behind the copse of trees? What is the plan? And, at one point, I think I have an account here from Of course, Newton. Uh, Newton says,
I feel
"Oh,
like we need an arrow every time you say Newton to like point to that guy right behind you.
On this
they,
edition of the John Newton Report.
yeah."
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about that.
In Newton's article written in North American Review in 1891, Newton writes, notwithstanding the bloody results of the day to the Union forces, who fought under the peculiar disadvantage of having to meet the initiative of the enemy without a well-defined plan. So from midnight until 3 p.m., the corps are in position. What are we supposed to be doing? Now Meade's going around doing this reconnaissance, and Meade later comes up and says that uh, he was contemplating ordering an attack from the right using Slocum's 12th Corps plus the 5th Corps that arrived early that morning. And the reason he didn't launch it yet, he was waiting for the 6th Corps to come up and be his reserve. However, Slocum comes back and says, take a look at the ground. It's really not a good place for an attack. And so Meade later says that he was planning on, here it is, although I remember, all I remember is having sent an order to Slocum early on the morning to hold his corps, the 12th and 5th, in readiness as soon as the 6th should arrive to attack vigorously from our extreme right. Slocum reported against the proposed attack on account of the character of the ground. I then awaited the arrival of the 6th Corps to move the 5th to our left when I intended, if the enemy had made no demonstrations, to attack from the left. Before this could be executed, the enemy, seeing the bait Sickles held out to them, they attacked first. So just rereading that today, I'm like, okay, so does that mean that there's no attack from the right? And so now Meade's planning at 3 p.m. to issue an order that the 3rd Corps and the 5th Corps would attack on the left. Well, if that's the case, and Dan, I'm calling you Dan Sickles. Uh,
You wouldn't be the first one to make that mistake.
uh, stop me if I'm stealing your thunder here. But Sickles, also in North American Review in 1891, says what he was doing on the morning of July 2nd. The early morning of July 2nd was spent reconnoitering my front on the left, choosing positions, gathering information about the roads, and learning something about the force and disposition of the enemy. I had pointed out the night before in a letter to General Meade that our left was our assailable point. General Tremaine, Colonel Moore, my aides de camp rode over to headquarters again and again, all through the morning, repeating the situation of things on my front. I went in person to the headquarters and asked General Meade to come to me and reconnoiter the left, but he was too busy. So did Meade reconnoiter the left? Because at 3 p.m., it sounds like he's about to issue an order to launch an attack from the left.
Well, and that's the other problem because really the reason the 3 o'clock meeting probably even still exists historically in any way, shape, or form is because Butterfield and Sickles, yes, the two of them together, right? Butterfield is going to say, "Oh, Meade had me preparing a retreat order." Right. So I think that kind of goes to what you were saying earlier, Paul, about Butterfield probably should be doing more of that. I think you said the operational planning function, but he's preparing the retreat order. And look, most serious historians, as we all know, put that retreat order today down as probably a reasonable contingency on Meade's part. But of course, enemies like Butterfield and Sickles kind of blew it up like Meade. That Meade at 3 o'clock was going to call a retreat from Gettysburg, which it's kind of ridiculous, but that's how it goes out in the records. So yeah, I think ultimately we don't know what they were going to talk about at 3 o'clock, other than the fact that everybody's together for the first time.
Yeah, and Sickles throws into his report here that that Sykes said he was summoned to the headquarters, and they were just talking when the enemy opened. But Sickles says he cites this Meade telegram to Halleck at 3, and he says it's sent at 3 p.m. on the 2nd. The army is fatigued, and if not attacked, I can get any and I can get any positive information of the position of the enemy, which will justify me in doing so. I shall attack.
Hmm.
If I find it hazardous to do so, or I am satisfied the enemy is endeavoring to move to my rear and interpose between me and Washington, I shall fall back to my supplies. I feel fully responsible, the responsibility resting upon me, but will endeavor to act cautiously. And so Sickles again goes on to say, the enemy is about to advance, and we had no plan of action, no order of battle. And so, from midnight until 3 p.m., that's a lot of time for people to be sitting around and, idle hands. Is
Well,
going to allow Sickles to,
you just brought up a
Yeah.
great point because I know, especially in leadership tours, people really like to throw Sickles under the bus. But what you're saying is, how much direction did he really have?
yeah, you know, yeah. You give them an opportunity to do something. Yeah, guess what? They're going to do it. So going back to the previous comment, who's doing current operations? Meade and his corps commanders. Well, if you're not getting anything from Meade, the corps commanders are going to take charge, and so Sickles takes charge. I see something out in front of me. I'm going to do something. Uh, Now, let's swing the pendulum back and take a look at Meade, because Meade, when he hears that Butterfield uh, testifies before the Joint Committee about this retreat order, Meade is shocked. I have not the remotest remembrance having given Butterfield any such directions. I should have given such directions after having. Why should I give such directions after having labored all night to concentrate my army at Gettysburg? Why should I, before the enemy had made any movement to render such a course necessary, order retreat? I had observed in one of Gibbons's notes that you were referred an order by Butterfield. All I remember, and so he goes on to say, I was just trying to tell them to be familiar with the roads.
Roads.
It wasn't an order to retreat. I was just saying be familiar with the roads. And so yes, and there is a comment here. It's actually written in italics in John Gibbons' personal recollections of the Civil War. It says that Daniel Butterfield told Baldy Smith of this order. It doesn't say that Baldy Smith read the order. And as far as I know, there is no written copy of the written retreat order. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Jim. You probably know more about it than I. And Smith has this dialogue with Meade. I asked Smith if it were not a contingent order based on the supposition that the approaching battle might be against us, in which case it was to be issued. And Smith said no. Uh, it was written as the fighting, before any fighting took place, and contemplated the immediate retiring of the army. Now, and what's interesting about that order is the Gibbon Butterfield account. Uh, Butterfield asked Gibbon to please read this over.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we talk about, a general gives a private to gives an order to a private. Here, read this to make sure that from all the way down from general to private, everybody understands it. And Gibbon's response is, "My God, does Meade want to retreat?" No, 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 no. I just want you to read the order, make sure it makes sense. Butterfield says he also gave it to either Hancock or Howard. But later in the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, he mentions he gave it to Williams and Ingalls. Now that would be probably Seth Williams and Rufus Ingalls, the chief quartermaster, who are a part of Butterfield's staff.
Right.
So again, it's Butterfield in later writing says he being Meade merely directed me to prepare such an order, which I did. It is for him to say whether he intended to execute it or not. He may have desired it prepared for an emergency without any view of actually executing it. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's part of it that people often forget. I know, like thinking of Butterfield's Joint Committee testimony, when they try to pin him down and say, "Was this a retreat order?" He does kind of back off a little bit and say, "Well, could have been a contingency. I'm not really sure." I think, and I'm glad you read the 3 o'clock message from Meade to Halleck because I had that here in front of me as well. I think given what we have on the record, we don't have a lot about this 3 o'clock meeting. Meade didn't mention it in his report. He didn't mention it in the Joint Committee testimony. He says, "Oh, at 3 o'clock, I just kind of rode out to see Sickles," and kind of bypasses all that. I think the 3 o'clock message to Halleck then has to kind of stand as our closest record of, okay, what was Meade going to talk about at that meeting? Which, as you read, would have basically been, we're either going to attack or if the enemy is trying to get around us, we're going to fall back to Westminster. And I think
Mhm.
that's probably the closest Meade was thinking of retreat to that point, and presumably what they were going to talk about.
and I think that's what it is. Pulling back to Westminster is just confirmation back from Meade back to Halleck. I fully acknowledge I still remember my duty of being the operational army to protect Baltimore and Washington.
Yeah. And the
And,
other thing you mentioned too with Williams and Ingalls about people who maybe got a copy of this. One guy who I'm pretty sure says he doesn't get a copy of this is Henry Hunt. And Hunt says, "Look, I mean, you would have had to give me the order. I would have had to start pulling the artillery reserve back," which again would be another sort of indication that it wasn't what the critics made it out to be.
yeah, so here we have me, Butterfield, doing the right thing, being that planner, thinking about, okay, what do we do next? Okay, what if the enemy does attack us? So that would have been really good information to give to the Corps commanders at 3 p.m. Okay, here is all the information I have about the enemy. And Meade says, I'm trying to gather more information. So he would have given the Corps commanders information. It, again, I'm going to poke Meade in the eye here. It would have been nice to hear feedback from Sickles. I got something in front of me, and for Meade to react to that. And so he's planning an attack on the right. As we mentioned earlier, talking about the seniority of Slocum. Um, hey, I want to go to the right here and push them away from Baltimore, Washington. Well, you can't look at the terrain. Does Meade override Slocum? Sounds like he's not about to. And here's a great opportunity. Big what if? Hey, it would have been Sickles going. Hey, this is the perfect attack area on the left. And
Oh, but it never happened. It never happened. All right, so the 3 o'clock meeting doesn't happen because it gets broken up by the opening of the battle on Sickles's front. Warren tells Meade Sickles is out of position. Sickles arrives at headquarters, et cetera, et cetera. Podcast, tour, topic, debate for a different time. But of course, it brings on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. So, how about then we shall move to the evening after the fighting has died down on the left, and let's talk about the most famous of the Meade War Councils, which, of course, Paul has referenced several times. He has an artistic impression of that as his background tonight. Paul, so how about the 8 o'clock message from Meade to Halleck?
yeah,
The-
I'm smiling here because I was waiting to see the question. What time is the Council of War?
Yeah, yeah. We'll get there. So how about the 8 o'clock message first? Because I think specific, and this is kind of is for background for everybody. This was kind of how the germination of this episode kind of came together. Paul and I were talking about this over dinner one night with some other folks, and I said, "Hey, come on the podcast and let's talk about this." So, Meade to Halleck. The enemy attacked me today, was repulsed. I shall remain in my present position tomorrow, but I'm not prepared to say, until better advised of the condition of the army, whether my operations will be of an offensive or defensive character. So that's timed at 8 o'clock, but apparently it doesn't go out until much later. So, Paul, I'll kind of hand that ball over to you. What do you think is going through Meade's head now in the evening hours as we move into this later Council of War?
Well, now that we've read the 3 p.m. and the 8 p.m. message to Halleck, don't they sound very similar? I
Yeah,
plan
don't
on
they?
Yeah.
attacking, but the army's tired unless
Yep.
the enemy attacks me.
I'll fall
I'm
back if
not
I
sure
have
what's going
to.
on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to hear from my subordinates who kind of outrank me. It sounds very indecisive, doesn't it? But again, he's sounding more and more like today's military planner. Okay, I'm either going to go left unless I have to go right, and then there's always up the middle, or I can pull back. So it
He's
sounds
leaving his options open.
like he's keeping his options open.
Very
Um,
much.
Unlike Ambrose Burnside, who said, "No, I'm going to lead the attack the next
Yeah.
day at Fredericksburg myself. I'm either going to
Yep.
die on this hill, or we're going to capture that hill." And everybody's like, "No, no, 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 you're not doing
As we've said, you do ROTC leadership tours, you do leadership tours for other venues, and so on and so forth. What do you think of sort of, I don't want to call it the modern revisionism, but I've heard more and more people in recent years kind of saying, "Oh, Meade has already made up his mind. He's just calling the team together to build consensus." What do you sort of think of maybe that approach from General Meade?
that." I I agree with the consensus idea that, yeah, he definitely wants to get buy-in from the team, as we talked about earlier with the revolt of the generals and the experience that they've already seen in front of the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War. And maybe that's something in the back of his head. I think, like Jody just said, he's keeping all his options open. He's willing to discuss, but I think by the end of the day, he kind of has already got an idea. Yeah, we're spending the night here.
Hmm.
Uh, Whether we go on the attack in the morning, we're probably spending the night here. There are a number of different accounts. I think Butterfield says it as well. Gibbon, I think, says it as well. Is that Sickles is, I'm sorry, Meade is not heavily engaged initially in the Council of War.
Right.
He's reading messages. He's sitting in the corner. Every once in a while, he perks up and asks a question. So if you have that message written at about 8 o'clock, I went out and did a quick search as far as what time is sunset,
Yeah.
uh, because Gibbon says, when the firing ceased. Well, if the firing ceases uh, sometime after sunset because of the attack on East Cemetery Hill, and twilight starts at 9 o'clock and full on night is 10:15. Uh, okay, who is arriving at what time?
Yeah.
Gibbon's there, Newton's there because they're the closest. As things are calmed down between Sykes and Sedgwick over on the left, is Slocum still busy? And Howard's still busy. Maybe Hancock is still a little bit busy with East Cemetery Hill. And so, so it's not everybody shows up at one time. I think they're trickling in, and then just talking, giving their estimated uh,
Yeah.
uh, engagement
So
strength.
this is like a
I
late, like 11 o'clock, 11, it's late, 11:30,
Yeah,
midnight.
I've just done some stuff. Just recently, I was doing something about the planning on Culp's Hill for a Seminary Ridge presentation, and I talked about I'm sorry, an ACHS. I don't want to get my organizations wrong, but Alpheus Williams, I know, says it's about midnight. If I recall correctly, he says it's about midnight when it's breaking up because that's when he finds out from others that the trenches on Culp's Hill are occupied, and he goes and has that conversation with Slocum. So you can kind of ring fence the back end of it, and then
Mhm.
yeah, like you said, depending on what time it starts on the front end.
For for me, that's important because going back to my earlier conversation about the B2C2WGs, is that meetings don't just happen like that. There is an meetings happen in three steps. Okay, one, there was the informal gathering. Okay, people trickling in, trying to figure out where they're going to sit. Is the boss attending? Do they have their coffee? Have they hit their restroom before they attend the meeting and stuff like that? And then you get into the formal meeting where minutes are typically kept. And then you have the informal departure. As people are leaving, there's always one or two people who I didn't like the boss's decision, so I'm going to go up and get in his face. Or I'm going to go up and, oh, maybe I didn't say that well during the meeting. Let me say it again. No, the meeting's over. We're leaving now. And so keeping that in mind, I think we have people trickling in because the fight over at East Cemetery Hill, you've got troops from the Second Corps, Hancock sending Carroll's brigade over there and stuff like that. And so, based on the account of Meade sitting there reading reports every once in a while, what did you say? How many effective strength do you have? He in the informal part, I don't think he is actively engaged until at one point Daniel Butterfield talks about this guy, John Newton, and and Butterfield proceeds to describe Newton starting off kind of in his very calm, congenial way of toasting Meade. Congratulations, sir. And Meade kind of is like, for what? He goes, well, you didn't have a plan today, and we still won. And the enemy beat us back into a position we can't be beat out of. And then there's the conversation of, well, that's because this is no place for a battle.
Right.
And Gibbons says it was Newton who said it was no place for a battle. I think Butterfield says it was
It's Meade.
Meade who actually said it was no place for a battle.
Started with a backhanded compliment from Newton.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
right.
with what you're
Uh,
saying.
yeah.
Always comes back to Newton. I just wanted to add for our own record, I think Hancock also said Meade said that. I think in the James Kelly interviews,
Yeah.
Hancock quotes Meade as saying that too.
So yeah, Butterfield gives a really good description. Here it is. I'm sorry. So Newton's genial and calm temperament. Quote, General Meade, I think you ought to feel much gratified with today's results. Meade responds, in the name of common sense, Newton, why?
It's great.
Why, said Newton, with his pleasant expression and smile, they have hammered us into a solid position they cannot whip us out of. Okay. And then it goes on to say the recollections of everybody who visited with the Conteparis back in 1890. Meade used the language in his expression in expressing his own opinion that Gettysburg was no place to fight a battle, or Gettysburg was no place to fight a battle. Uh, and hopefully, stop me if I derail this thing.
Mm.
I think that term, a battle, is very important because if you think about in medieval warfare, it was, hey, you come out of that castle and give us battle on an open field where we can show us our bravery, our chivalry. I think that's the term they use with a battle. It's no Gettysburg is no place to go on the offense because you have Little Round Top and a ridge line facing, Seminary or Oak Hill and a ridge line. It's exactly the same terrain, ridge line, separated by a mile of
Mhm.
open field. How do you go on the offense? Because either way, it plays to the defender. And so I think that's what's frustrating between that conversation between Newton and Meade is that Meade cannot find a good place to go. He can't swing out from the right from Culp's Hill, and
Mm.
before he does, on the left or ignoring Sickles, he's missed that opportunity because now Lee has done it. He has done the right turn, but still, you're in a very strong position. Lee is in a very strong position. There's no place to go on the offense. Gettysburg is good ground, you know.
I think that's a good observation. And again, critics would say Meade's statement was, oh, he wanted to retreat. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to be at Gettysburg at all. But I like the spin that you put on that. The other thing I wanted to mention too, you talked about informal and then it gets formal and then it gets informal again as it departs. That's actually almost exactly how the descriptions of the Council of War play out. They start talking informally. Butterfield goes into administrator mode and says, hey, don't we think we should put this in writing
Mhm.
and let's get some questions down here? And then they have the informal departures as they leave. And, Meade says to Gibbon, hey, fella, they're going to attack your front tomorrow and things of that nature. But the other thing I wanted to mention too, as it relates to Butterfield putting this in writing, and I'm going to go back to the 8 o'clock message because I feel like when people talk about, oh, yeah, Meade's already decided what he wants to do, he's just consensus building and all of that stuff. I feel like they always forget the second part of the 8 o'clock message. And the second part of the 8 o'clock message is, I'm not prepared to say until I'm better advised of the condition of the army. And even before they get to the three questions, what's one of the first things Butterfield puts in writing? The head count on what is the condition of the army. And they come up with about 58,000 when they do the head count on the infantry. So I think the meeting serves a very rational and practical purpose as well. Meade tells Halleck, hey, I'll let you know what I'm going to do when I know what the condition of the army is. What do? They get the condition of the army.
Mhm.
So I like that. I like your view of Meade's view of a battlefield much more than just sort of a touchy-feely consensus building, which, I'm sure there is. I have no doubt there is some of that as well. But this guy needs to know what the condition of his army is, regardless of whether or not he's decided we're going to stay here tonight.
I feel like we're kind of myth busting right now because I think he needs to know the condition of the army way more than he needs the touchy-feely part that nowadays we tend to focus on. Oh, me just wanted to get his team together and make them feel good
Right.
about this decision he already made. He hadn't already made the decision. He's making it with them.
Yeah,
I,
yeah. We'll use Longstreet's term. The best 3 hours of fighting. The Sixth Corps
mhm.
just marching 35 miles. Um, when was the last time these guys ate?
Yeah.
Resupply of ammunition,
Mhm.
treatment of the casualties. Um, to quote the great Ted Turner, and nobody's going to fight on day three. We're all too tired. They're probably, yeah, we're going to stay here tonight. We're going to wait it out. I'm still accomplishing my mission. I'm between Lee and Baltimore, Washington, unless for some reason he tries to outflank us. And there is the discussion of, okay, well, that Newton says, I'm worried about our left flank, and I'd like to say that it's one of the funny things, and I think he is that him sleeping right there. I think there's Warren, or maybe he's on this side. So I'd like to think about, okay, Warren's an engineer, Meade's an engineer, and Newton's headquarters was right down by the Pennsylvania Memorial, so we probably would have been maybe one of the earlier ones to arrive at the headquarters for the Council of War. Um, he sees Warren, a fellow engineer. Warren's wounded, in the neck, and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
where'd you get wounded? Oh, I got wounded on Little Round Top. What's a Little Round Top? Because Newton hasn't been down there. Um, and maybe there's a transfer of information from one engineer to another, also, to Meade as well. Hey, you know, we just got to watch out that somebody's going to turn our flank. And Newton, in later accounts, actually says that got kind of blown out of proportion. I later went back and, talked to people. In fact, Hancock actually says it in his joint committee. He goes, Newton later expressed he wasn't asking for a retreat. He was saying we just need to watch for any kind of turning movement. And Meade on the morning of the 3rd does tell Sedgwick to put 2 brigades down there on what is
Hmm.
now Allen Wright Avenue.
Right.
And so Meade actually takes input from those comments. Obviously, if the Confederate Army had attempted to go to the right, then we're talking about the Newt Gingrich book, with that fiction play. So we'll never know. But uh, the accounts here, Daniel Butterfield, Slocum was much more quiet and collected on the night of the Council of War. Howard seemed more calm and collected at the headquarters under the fire of the second day battle. And so Butterfield actually does describe the personalities that night, what everybody was doing or thinking or saying, and they
Hmm.
all pretty much agreed. I also like to bring out the point of, okay, what's Butterfield's job? He's the chief of staff. He's got a ton of reports he's got to read or write that night.
Mhm.
And he sees Meade and Newton and Gibbon and all these people yakka yakka yakking. He's like, I got work to do. Come on, let's sum this up. And so he comes up with 3 quick points. So I always try to tell this to, like, remember Jody when we used to deal
Yeah.
with executive leadership programs. Okay, if you're planning on talking for an hour, don't have 20 things to talk about. Focus in on 2 or 3 key things you want the boss to make a decision on. And Butterfield does a great job of boiling that down. And I really like the terms that they use. Should we stay or should we go? If we stay, do we attack or do we await attack? Notice he doesn't say, do we go on the offense or stay on the defense? It's always the military mind frame of seizing the initiative, of giving battle, of offering battle, of being the first to strike. And they lose that initiative to Lee. Again, I beat up Meade earlier before, for well over 9 hours, not telling anybody what he's thinking, what the plans are, and coordinating any kind of response to a Confederate attack. And there you go. And Sickles is, out there doing what he wants.
Hmm.
Um, so here again, I think Butterfield, if anything, this may be a nice little prodding from Butterfield. Should we attack or await attack? Hey, keep saying attack to the boss, and maybe he'll get it that we should attack. And then the third point is, okay, if Lee doesn't attack tomorrow, when do we attack, boss? See how he says it again? And so I think there may be some prompting there from Butterfield, to, hey, we can do this, boss. Let us go. Let
Well,
loose the dogs of war.
so I've been waiting for an opening on this because, as I'm sure you know, I had James Poola on recently, and he just did the new Butterfield biography, and I asked him this question. And then a couple of weeks later, I had Doug Dowds on, and I asked him the same question. So you've sort of already gone down the path, Paul, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So ultimately, Dan Butterfield, Chief of Staff, Gettysburg Campaign. Do you think he serves George Meade well? Does he do George Meade dirty? A little bit of both. I think, well, I won't tell you what their answers were because I'm sure you watched those episodes. But what's your take, Paul?
I think Butterfield during the battle, uh, does well. I think there's the personal slight that I think Butterfield kind of feels afterwards. Um, Meade sends him a very nice note, but it sends it like 2 weeks later. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't write you earlier. How are you feeling? We missed you. I had to give your position to somebody else because you were gone so long, and when I read that letter, I smile and laugh because I think of Batchelder. Because Batchelder later in life had a conversation with Daniel Butterfield, and Butterfield said, "Oh, this is where I was wounded," and Batchelder said, "It was no scratch. You weren't
Yeah,
wounded."
yeah.
And
You,
Butterfield never talked to Batchelder ever again.
you got hit by a
Uh,
branch or something. Yeah, yeah.
yes, I know it hit you right below the heart, but it didn't penetrate. What's the big deal? Yeah. Um,
But I like if you're looking at this as a crisis management situation, Butterfield's doing what he's supposed to be doing at that time.
yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, he so there's some goodness and badness there. He's doing exactly what Meade asked him to do, and nothing more. And so this is where I scratch my head. It wasn't was Butterfield a previous Corps commander? And
Hmm.
so if Meade would have been wounded, who would have taken over command of the army? Slocum if he's in the heat of the battle, Sedgwick, maybe Butterfield because he's right there at army headquarters, and you know. So is he doing what he needs to do? Yes. Is he doing more? I don't know what more he could have done, but getting supplies up, getting wounded out, getting food, getting. So I'm kind of middle of the road on Butterfield. If I can just throw one last thing because we
Okay.
never get to talk about this guy, General Sykes. Sykes in a letter to Gibbon says about the Council of War. He didn't keep any notes, but he said that I felt very confident that after the enemy's attack on me that day and its repulse, he could not do half as well the next time he tried it. Now,
Hmm.
if you're Meade and you're not sure what to do, and one of your subordinates is extremely confident, at the same time, one of your subordinates, Bernie, is like, I don't care what you guys decide, the third corps is used
Yeah,
up.
we're used up.
Sometimes the coach wants to do something, but the players are like, we can do this. And, and so, yeah, that's one thing about it.
Well, and some of that confidence, so let's go to the July 4th one, because I want to make sure we get time in for both of them. Some of that confidence seems to evaporate on the mysterious July 4th Council of
Hmm.
War. Now we've been part of a friend's fun exercise in the past year or so to try to figure out where the Council of War occurred on July 4th. Butterfield says it occurred at Neal's headquarters, which would be at one of the private residences along the Baltimore Pike. And there's competing theories that I know different people have. And I don't want to go so much into where, but let's sort of talk about, if you guys don't mind, what now are the key decisions confronting Meade and not quite the same team because some guys get wounded on July 3rd, but what's confronting Meade and his team of generals on July 4th that they have to address with yet another Council of War?
Yeah, so I have the minutes of the meeting right here. And
Okay.
so, again, starting off with the two key things: information, decision. So, the first thing Meade does is provide information to, as you said, there are some brand new acting corps commanders in the room. And so, Meade informs everybody what his orders are. His instructions were to cover Washington and Baltimore. And then he goes on to provide them more information saying that General Foster may be bringing up reinforcements out of the defenses of Washington, doesn't know when they're going to get here or, that. And so, based on that, it's okay, what should we do? and then a conversation starts up. And one of the things I thought was unique about this is that, we always stress that on the July 2nd evening Council of War, that Gibbon says, as the junior most officer in the room, because Warren's asleep, we followed the rules as in a court martial that the junior officer should speak first. At this Council of War, the first person to speak is Sedgwick.
Mm.
He kind of jumps right in. I think we should certainly, await, stay here in Gettysburg until we're sure that the enemy is moving away. And then Howard jumps in. So it's almost the senior guys right off the bat. And so once again, Meade this time pulls out a piece of paper and starts writing down questions. And I thought that was important because half of it apparently is written in Meade's hand and the other half is written in Butterfield's hand. And so the questions are, shall the Army remain here? And if we remain, should we assume the offensive? Or should we deem it expedient to move to Williamsport through Emmitsburg? Shall we pursue the enemy if he is retreating on a direct line? A number of people say, no, we shouldn't leave here until we're positive that the Confederates are leaving here, because some of them don't want to give up the field.
Right.
It's the old
Right.
kind of medieval thing that whoever controls the field actually can declare victory, that they stayed. There's a number of back and forth on, do we chase immediately after them in a direct line, or should we head south and try to outflank them? And what kind of force do we send? Just cavalry, cavalry plus infantry. And so the final tally here is five decide to remain at Gettysburg. Birney, Sedgwick, Sykes, Hayes for the Second Corps,
Mhm.
and Warren gets a vote in this one. Opposed to staying here at Gettysburg, they want to get moving. There's Newton, Pleasanton, and Slocum, and Howard's doubtful about the whole thing. So what I thought was kind of interesting here is Birney says, yes, we got to kind of stay here again. Again, it's because the Third Corps is kind of used up.
They just need another day, Paul. Just
Just
another
need
day.
another.
Okay.
They're going to rally.
Nichols will be back any day now.
It's coming back. Coming back.
Any day now. So yeah, again, it's one of these things of okay, let's not look at this in a vacuum.
Right.
It's a cold, wet, miserable day. Realistically, what are the road conditions? Can they physically get moving? When was the last time you guys ate? And when can they get a resupply of ammunition? Um, and so again, it's one of these things of no, we're going to wait here.
Hmm.
Um,
And to that point, what do they also do again? Again, they take another head count. What's the condition of the army? Which I think now they're down to, I think, something like 51,000.
Mhm.
Which is interesting too. They didn't lose that many bodies on July 3rd. If you went from 58 to 51, but again, there it is again. What's the condition of the army? That's one of the reasons why we're getting everybody together.
you're gonna use a lot of cavalry, which the guy hanging on the wall behind you has used up a lot of cavalry on July 3rd. Buford's cavalry has already left, and they're going to do good work. They're just not at Gettysburg. And then you have other forces still on their way here. There's an opportunity. We mentioned Baldy Smith earlier, that who is it? Daniel Couch's troops are coming out from Harrisburg, maybe pressing in from the north. Maybe just wait another day. Maybe they'll get down here. Maybe some of those guys down at Harper's Ferry with French will be coming up. We can together. So there's an opportunity here, but yeah, I think
Yeah, one thing I'll add too, because I think we mentioned this quote way back at the beginning, but I think it's Meade talking about July 4th. And again, we should remind folks one of the reasons why these are issues is because they come up in the Joint Committee of the Conduct of the War. Why is General Meade calling so many councils of war? Is he indecisive? Does he not want to fight? But I think this is here where Meade uses that quote, and I got the quote, so I want to just use it. Meade addressed the accusations of indecision, and he admitted these consultations, quote, were probably more numerous and more constant in my case from the fact I had just assumed command of the army, and I felt that it was due myself to have the opinions of high officers before I took action on matters which involved such momentous issues. There you go. If we take his testimony at face value, that's the insight into why he's doing this, right?
Yeah, and you got Sedgwick and Slocum speaking out pretty much right from the get-go. Hey, I've never done a pursuit before, but like you said in the joint committee, and they ask other generals, so what do you think should have happened immediately after the repulse? Well, we should have pursued. Okay, well, the Sixth Corps, I understand they had a long march on July 2nd, but why weren't they committed on July 3rd? Where's the pursuit? Where's the pursuit? And so, yeah, I just think that we got to be careful here. If you look at it in a vacuum, remember the weather conditions that are also happening at that time, and the condition of the soldiers.
But
Yeah,
Um,
when you look at like his dispatches to Halleck on the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, he's keeping him informed of his pursuit plans.
right, right.
I mean, the entire time. Like we'll go in the direction of Middletown. The movement will be upon Frederick. So he's doing that. So I think that's going to help him out later on
I think
when
you're
they
right. I mean,
didn't pursue.
one of the things he says to Halleck is, quote, I make a reconnaissance tomorrow to ascertain what the
Hmm.
intention of the enemy is. Should the enemy retreat, I shall pursue him on his flanks. A reconnaissance tomorrow. I think that seems to be primarily the outcome of the July 4th council. A recon. Yes, we're going to pursue, but we're still going to do it cautiously. It's going to be a reconnaissance and not anything rash.
sorry.
Oh, sorry, we lost
I was
Paul
like,
under the table for a
and
minute.
then we lost Paul.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
done.
I was looking to see. I thought there was also a comment in here. Ah, there it is. I'm sorry. There's a comment in here again from Newton. Um,
I'm starting to see a trend. Like you're totally getting rid of our sickles stuff here. It's just the Newton show tonight.
uh,
Well, I'm
uh,
sure I'm sure the John Newton report will just boost viewership through the roof.
Yeah.
well, I'm sorry. Newton is not called before the Joint Committee in the conduct of the war because he was sent out west after the reorganization of the Army. But Newton actually says it has been the occasion of unfavorable criticism of General Meade that on the repulse of the final charge, he did not take aggressive action. I think, however, a candid consideration of all the circumstances will show that little benefit could have followed such a movement. The same might be said of an attempt to press the Confederates in their retreat to the Potomac. In the broken and wooded country traversed by them, numberless positions for defense offered themselves, and the assailants would have suffered out of all proportion to the defenders. Finally, the proposed attack on the Confederate lines at Williamsport was pronounced folly by the most experienced officers of the Army. And so, where's Meade going to offer battle again? It's still on that very good defensive ground going back to South Mountain. And
Mhm.
then, they actually do get engaged at Monterey Pass and other places along the retreat route. But probably the best thing for him to do is to head south and try
But
to
even
outflank.
during the retreat, none of those areas would be a great, like you say, battle, a traditional battleground. None of them really.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so I understand his reports to Halleck, but you can see Halleck and Lincoln chomping at the bit. Thank you for
Yeah.
letting me know you're following my orders, but now bring on a battle.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, that's a great segue. Should we do our fourth Council of War then? The July 12th Devil's Backbone or
Yeah.
Williamsport Council of War.
Again,
Um, this is
struck
the
a
one I'm the most critical of Meade on. I'll explain in our conversation, but um, you want to kick this one off?
I can't because Newton wasn't at this one.
Okay, so the
And
Newton
the
report
Gettysburg
stopped for the
campaign.
evening.
Hey, I'm sorry to say John Newton was sick during this Council of War.
He had a cough.
Yeah.
No.
That's right. He's not there. So who replaces him? James Wadsworth.
Yeah,
So now we have Wadsworth from the First Corps in the Council of War. One of the interesting dynamics, I think, we start with that July 2nd, 3 p.m. We're now July 12th. You see how the team is changing, right? Due to casualties, due to attrition. We don't have a Hancock. We don't have a Newton. We don't have Sickles.
But at
Butterfield
the
isn't
same
with us
time, they have
Butterfields.
time together. That
Yeah.
team now, and Meade has had time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of ironic. He's
right?
had time. I mean, granted, it's 14 days or whatever we're up to at this point, but now you have a lot of guys kind of
Right.
in the other world. And I would assume too, he's probably relying more on the Slocums and the Sedgwicks of the
Mm.
team more than ever, right? There's your seniority.
Yeah, yeah. So here we have General Meade on the 12th. About dark, the Corps commanders were summoned to Meade's headquarters. Uh, this is Wadsworth account.
Right.
Uh, Newton being ill, I was in command of the Corps temporarily. I attended the council. We assembled at about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. General Meade stated briefly the conditions of our forces. And again, there's the information going out to everybody. Here's what I know, and asked the Corps commanders, commencing with the ranking officer, General Sedgwick, what they thought of the expediency of attacking the enemy the next morning. Sedgwick, Slocum, Sykes, and now French. Okay, French comes over from what, the Harper's Ferry area, and Hayes, representing the Second Corps, decidedly against the attack. General Howard, Pleasanton, Wadsworth advised an attack. Meade stated that he favored an attack. Here's his opportunity to put a stamp on it. No, guys, I'm in charge.
Right.
That he came there and he stated he came there to fight and did not see any good reason why he should not fight them. Does that sound a little bit like if the enemy's there tomorrow, I'm going to strike them there?
I
Okay.
Yes, without the bad accent, it sounds exactly like that.
was going to say, who are you trying to, who was that?
Well, General, what are you saying? That we should hold here. But he said he could not take the responsibility of bringing on a general engagement against the advice of his commanders.
Mhm.
You know, I thought you said earlier to Halleck, you feel the responsibility of your position. It doesn't. This does not say that. If Lincoln would have heard about this, this is not him being in charge. It will be observed that some of the officers who opposed the attack were ranking officers of the Army, next to Meade in every respect except the highest positions in the Army. So that's the key point there, is that they had date of rank on him, but he is senior because he's first amongst equals, because he is in the position as commanding general. Sedgwick stated that Meade had won a great victory, and he ought not to jeopardize all he had gained by another battle at this time. Sykes and French stated there was nothing between the enemy and Washington except our army. And if we were overwhelmed, Washington and Baltimore would be open to the enemy. Now, that's important. That's challenging. Hey, you're going to fail the mission that Halleck and Lincoln gave you. Warren made a strong and able argument in favor of an attack. Warren being aggressive, bring that into 64.
Because it might be the
Uh,
last time we hear this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pleasanton and Howard voted for an attack. Howard didn't like, never saw an attack he didn't like. Wadsworth uh, fought back against the reasoning, stating that he urged that our line of breastworks, the Antietam Creek and the South Mountain, gave us defensive lines that could hold the enemy if we were repulsed in our assault, and that the enemy were demoralized and short of ammunition. So he's saying, oh, that justification that
Yeah.
if we lose, Lee's going to march into Washington. No, we've got great defensive positions behind us, and
Well,
so
and at this
that
point, Lee's not getting a lot of ammunition. So,
yeah. And I think it's one of the lines I actually ended up deleting out of here. I think Wadsworth also goes on to say something to the effect of, "There's no way Lee, with his back to a flooded river, is going to launch an offense."
right.
It's like, yeah, that's a good read of the terrain.
Yeah, isn't
Right.
it? From basically the lowest guy in the room, right?
Yeah,
At that point. Yeah, let me just add a couple of comments there, and I'm glad we generally seem to be on the same page with this. There'll be less arguing at the dinner table next time. Um, no, I'm just kidding.
what
But
controversy.
couple things, Meade wrote to his wife on the 12th. That
Hmm.
Lee, quote, appears to be getting into a strong position where he can act on the defensive. I shall be prudent and not act rashly. And the same day, Meade again tells Halleck, pretty much what we've been hearing now for the past 14, 15 days. He would attack on the following day, quote, unless something intervenes to prevent it. So, Paul, you did a nice job going through the chain of events. The thing I'm critical of, which I don't feel like people ever really mention or talk about. So Meade comes out of this meeting and basically says, okay, we're going to spend tomorrow reconnoitering. And Meade and Humphreys do a lot of it personally. Andrew Humphreys, world-class engineer. I mean, he could very well be the best guy on the team to be doing this. My problem is they spend the next day reconnoitering and now come to the same damn decision that Meade essentially was going to make in the first place. Now the orders for the 14th are essentially a reconnaissance in force. We're going to push forward and probe and then advance in force. My problem is from that point of view, not only what you talked about, Paul, in terms of literally Meade letting the room talk him out of what he came in there to tell them to do, but they spent the day reconnoitering and come to the same decision. So what did you see? What did you not see on the 13th? You seemed to come to the same opinion that, okay, we're going to advance on the 14th. And of course, you've given Lee that day to
And,
get away.
and
Now,
it's
I
more than
know,
24 hours. It's a long amount of time.
right, right, exactly. And and you mentioned it, I think, in Newton's quote, yes, everyone looked at this afterwards and said, oh my God, this would have been a slaughter if we had moved forward. Thank God we didn't. And I get that. Of course, we can't recreate today whether that's true or not, but they said it. But, leaders lead, and you and your top flight engineer spent the whole day reconnoitering the position and came to the same opinion that, yeah, we can advance. And of course, it let Lee get away. So I do fault him for that as well.
And he
Yeah,
he writes to his wife again, and he says, "I hesitated to attack him."
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
yeah.
I I called my corps commanders together, and they voted against attacking him. So he tells her they voted, and so he just went along with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. When we're doing those kind of staff rides up on Oak Hill, we bring Ewell over the hill, and I kind of set up the
Yeah.
conditions for this. You're on high ground. You're on the Union flank. What do you? It's a golden opportunity. What are you going to do? And everybody goes attack. And then I turn around and go, wait a second. What were Lee's orders? Oh, wait until we're all together. You just disobeyed orders. And Dr. Carol Reardon has brought this up as well, and during those staff rides, is there something else that you can do and bring up the artillery and do harassing fire while Lee's crossing the river? You don't know that the harassing fire would interrupt that, but harassing fire would have at least, maybe it's like Hancock on the third, keep firing. It would have
Yeah.
been a good morale effort. Maybe
Hmm.
some thought it was a waste of ammunition, but it's disappointing that they didn't do something.
Right.
At least master fire, give it back to them a little bit. And so there's an opportunity lost there. Yeah.
Agree. And so you come back to the Joint Committee, which, as we've said, is why a lot of this stayed in the historical record. Again, people, when they think of the Joint Committee, they always think of Sickles, 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 Sickles attacking Meade, Sickles attacking Meade. The Joint Committee is most critical on Meade, most critical against Meade for letting the enemy, quote unquote, get away at Williamsport. It's not Sickles in the Peach Orchard or the retreat from Gettysburg order that ultimately the Joint Committee zeroes in on. The Joint Committee zeroes in on Williamsport. And look, I've never run an army. I've managed people in business. It ain't the same, but at the same time, as historians, and I think we're pretty good Gettysburg historians. Yeah, there are a few things I think we can kind of kick the tires on regarding the decision making at Williamsport.
It
Yeah.
makes it look like it's a pattern of behavior
Mm.
where he's overly cautious.
And if I give a shout out to the tours that you two have put together, I went down with you to the Battle of Falling Water sites for
Oh,
1863 and seeing that terrain, walking that terrain. Would it have been a tough? Would there have been casualties? Sure. Would it have been a gamble? Okay, yes. I hate to say it. That's why I say, the harassing fire would have at least done something, do something. Um, and and I've got two more quotes I'd like to go through. But before I do that, let's just remind everybody this is not Meade's last council of war.
Yeah.
no.
There is that wonderful photograph that Gary likes to show from Massaponax in 1864 with Grant and Meade and the church, the pews moved out of the Massaponax church, and there they are in the front yard. And there's Grant having a council of war, talking about, okay, we just came out of the wilderness in Spotsylvania. All right, how are we going to get across the North Anna River? And so the council of wars keep going. And I would dare say that Eisenhower has a council of war, and he makes the weather call prior to D-Day. So it's not the last one that we'll ever see. And council of wars actually do fight. So.
Good.
If I could go back, the main reason that a lot of the corps commanders revisited Gettysburg was because the Comte de Paris actually visited the site in the 1890s, and he writes in his account the visit to the small wooden country house, which stands unaltered since 1863. Where Meade had his headquarters, and near which Butterfield received a glorious wound. There is an old proverb which says that the councils of war never fight. But there is another rule which must never be forgotten. It is that whatever may be the opinion of a council of war, it is nothing but an opinion, and that the whole responsibility of any decision rests entirely and only upon the commander in chief. Meade's utterances in the Council of War, therefore, I think it must be most empathetically asserted that whatever may have been Meade's utterances in the Council of War, he must reap the whole benefit of the decision he endorsed and carried it into effect. And so, in that circumstance, he deserves all the credit for the evening of July 2nd. And I think you're rightly so, Jim. He deserves all the censure for the 12
Mhm.
July decision as well. He's got to live with that. If I could just finish with Butterfield's
Hmm.
comment. because Butterfield later in life, I think he actually reconciles with the now deceased Meade. And he says it was Meade's victory, as it would have been his defeat had it terminated in the enemy's favor. Whatever we may have thought in years agone, with less reflection and no knowledge of present results, speculation as to what might have occurred is but speculation. We cannot blame the prudence and conservative judgment that led Meade not to stake what, in case of failure, might perhaps have caused a fatal result of our union. His greatest responsibility did not descend below the commander or to those of us who would have had it otherwise. Some of us believe that it was a good providence that endowed him with caution. We believe that his unquestioned bravery in obeying orders between Washington and Baltimore, right? We believe his unquestioned bravery in obeying orders carried with it a saving and prudent judgment when he personally commanded that it was better for the country, for all sides, that the fighting was not pushed for the conclusion. And results we then thought and still think might have been possible, and that we can be profoundly grateful for the results as they stand today. And here's the last kick, and I wonder who this is pointed at. Many subordinate commanders to this day think their action won the battle,
Who could that be?
which would have been lost but for the combined work of all. And so I think whether it's consensus or me asking for advice or just letting people be heard, he builds a team,
Yeah.
and that team performs very well. And when the boss makes a bad decision,
Mm.
they're going to fight in 1864 and 1865.
Yeah,
And
it's first, those are great quotes to kind of wrap up with here. I often use the term, or at least I think of it in my head, team of rivals when I think of the command structure of the Army of the Potomac. Not to steal the title from a much more famous author, but it is a team of rivals, and like you said, for better or worse, Meade puts it together.
yeah, he does. And one last point as well, it's a lot of military people when they assume a command position, they come in very hard. They want to be the strict disciplinary person. Um, and it's also one of the reasons why whenever an enlisted soldier is promoted to sergeant, we would typically move him to a different company, or so that way he couldn't be in charge of the guys he used to drink beers with and get in trouble with on the weekend. He's now an NCO. He's a leader, junior leader. So we need to move him to be in charge of soldiers that don't know him very well. And so we always expect the new leaders to come in very hard, very strict. And then as they get to know their team and they build trust, they kind of loosen up. Meade comes in kind of soft.
Yeah.
Let me listen to you. Let me hear this. Let me hear this. And then he gets burned on July 12th. And then maybe, there's all these accusations that happen. There's the reorganization of the Army that he is told, here are his new commanders. He doesn't even get to pick his own team. And
Right.
I think that really hardens him. And maybe that's why we see Meade really being a hard case in 64 and 65. It's that he has done that flip from, instead of being the soft guy now, he's now the you guys burned me and I didn't have enough confidence in myself, and so no, we're doing this tomorrow.
Take a few minutes and visit our website at the battleofgettysburgpodcast.com to shop, buy some new merch, check in on our upcoming events, and of course, Buy Civil War books from one of your favorite podcasters.
Jody, any closing comments?
No, I mean, this has been very enlightening, I think. We've gone a little bit deeper than just our normal look at the Lydia Leicester house and what
Yes.
happens there at the Council of War, you know?
Yep,
We all fit in
absolutely.
there.
Absolutely.
The good old Leicester, Lydia Leicester house.
All right, Paul Bailey,
Well, thank you
license.
for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a
Hey,
lot of
thanks
Yeah.
for
fun.
bringing the Newton show.
Yes, yes, yes.
Now we just need to
Everybody,
write it.
viewers across the globe are Googling, who is this John Newton guy?
Who is John Newton?
Yeah. When are they going to talk about sickles again? But yes. All right, Battle of Gettysburg podcast. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We will see you again soon.